Hey, what is up? What's going on? Arvind Ramakrishna here, and welcome to Driven to Draw. Today, I've got 3 amazing tips when drawing with markers. So let's get started. Tip number 1 is start light with your colors. And so if you're going to take any kind of reference photograph like I'm doing here with an owl, if anyone remembers, I used to remember when people used to there's this running joke when 3 steps on drawing an owl, and that was to have step number 1, you have these basic shapes, and step number 2 was to add this beak, and bam, step number 3, you had this freaking owl. Anyway, forget about that. I'm going to start with the first tip, which is sketching with light colors. That when you start to draw or use markers, especially when you have a wide range of colors and stuff, the best thing for you to do, especially when you're looking at reference photographs, is just to start with a very light color. Don't try to get into too much color variation. I think that in this particular example right here, when I'm drawing this owl, I'm just using a 40% gray, but you can even use a 30% gray. You don't have to even go this dark in the value range. And what this allows you to do is sort of experiment with your technique when you're starting out. You don't have to get in and try to make everything perfect. Just imagine if you start to draw with a Sharpie, how intimidating that is, because it's so dark and you're not sure. Once you commit that ink to the page, then you're sort of stuck with it, right? So that's tip number 1. Always start with something really, really light, and then you can always build up the value range as you start to work on that drawing. Now, tip number 2 is about simplifying your drawing. So even when you're using some sort of a reference photograph, don't try to go too detailed with it. That means start to indicate those details. Use broad strokes. So when you look at me drawing the feathers, or I'm trying to indicate the feathers here on this owl, I'm using pretty broad strokes. If I really wanted to get into the details, I can go with a thinner tip, and I can start to really outline the feathers and start to put in a lot of finer details. But when you're working with markers, that kind of gets a little bit tough. I mean, the main idea here is to kind of start very broad, and then you start to narrow in those details. So what's nice about these markers is that they have a chisel tip, so you can kind of go broad stroke, and then you can go thin strokes. So that that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going back and forth, and I'm just changing it up a little, and sometimes I use the broad strokes to get the full range of the feathers, and then I'm just going to go back, and then I use the thinner portion of the marker. So once again, like I stated before, is simplify. Don't get too detailed at the beginning. You can always start to add those details when you get to the last stage of your drawing. The third tip is to minimize color usage. So as I kind of discussed before, when you're starting off with just gray, I'm just building a value here, because what this does is to train your brain to sort of see the shapes and the forms without getting into color. Most artists do this when they start off. I kind of did this when I started off, because color, there's just too much to comprehend when you start off with color. There's a whole new range of techniques. You got to understand the basics of your primary colors and how you're mixing colors, and then from there you can kind of look at the different kind of value ranges, the saturation of colors. They all get very complicated very quickly, and a lot of those kind of tips when you get into color really involves you understanding some of the basics. So when you start to reduce your color usage, it's not that you can't get into a lot of color. Especially if you're just looking at photographs and reference photographs, you can use color and experiment that way. But when you're drawing from your imagination, it's really critical for you to understand form and understand how you describe that form with that value change, right? And you can do that with just minimizing your color usage. That means in this particular illustration drawing, all I'm doing is just using gray, just a value range of gray, and then I'm coming back here for the eyes. I'm just using a light green color, and that's all I really need as far as a whole contrast level to make this thing pop. And then once I've done that, using my 40% gray marker, and then I'm using, I think, a 60% or 70% gray marker, and now I'm coming back here with the black marker, and that really pops it out. So now you can kind of see the layered effect in this sketch by just using only 3 different colors. Actually 4. I mean 3 different value ranges for the gray, and then coming back with just the light green color. So anyway, I hope this helped. This is the 3 tips. Again, start with light color grays, and 2 was to simplify the drawing, and 3 was to minimize the color usage. So we'll see you back here next time on Driven to Draw. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment below, and I will see you here in the next video next week. Have a good one.